:43 a.m. in Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. Now, one of the things that the father of our nation, Dr. Eric Williams, did say is that, the future of our nation lies in our children's school bags. And recently there was an announcement that, of course, there was going to be the cutting of, well, let's say the consideration of the cutting of gates, along with some other things. And I know that the student population, not just here in Trinidad and Tobago, but anybody who was interested in coming to the UWI St. Augustine campus, they took it into consideration. This morning we have with us not children but young adults who do have our nation's future in their hands. We have some representatives from the Guild of the University of the West Indies. With me this morning I have Kyle Bisnath, the Vice President of the Guild, Tyler Marie Mungal, I was telling her off air, I love her name, she is the Secretary, and we have Ashwarya Maraj, Treasurer. Welcome and good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's wonderful to have the three of you on the show this morning, and I think the first question we need to ask is, how is the student population feeling today?
Natasha, I think in relation to how our student population is feeling, I feel as though our students are appreciative, firstly, of the government of Trinidad and Tobago's support of opposition to the UE, firstly, in not supporting the increase in fees. But I think it's also relevant to consider that there is also still a lot of uncertainty that is surrounding, the future of the GATE program, considering the economic turbulence that we currently find ourselves in. There is a lot of uncertainty as to the longevity of the GATE program, and rightfully so, that is a bit concerning to many students. As many of our listeners this morning might be aware, thousands of our members are dependent on the GATE program in order to be able to afford education, and thousands more depend on it to be able to fully afford their education at an institution that provides a quality education that is also accredited. So definitely there is a bit of uncertainty, but we are saying this morning that we want to be actively involved in shaping this discussion, especially as the government indicated that they plan to review this. We want to be involved because this is of fundamental significance to our students and to the young people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, Kyle, one of the things that we were talking off air, and ladies as well, was the fact that, as university students, you are part of molding our future. And it's so fantastic, and it's necessary that you are willing to be an active part of the conversation, because at the end of the day, this is your future, and it's the future of generations to come as well. Ladies, I know we had Kyle's point of view about the student population, but what about you? Have you had any experiences with people who've come to you and told you, perhaps they're feeling a bit burdened, a bit concerned, and so forth?
Yeah, definitely. I know a lot of students were extremely worried about the position because, when you hear that the university is proposing an increase in tuition fees, it's a bit jarring, especially since I know a lot of colleagues of mine who also work and send themselves to school. So it was an added stress onto them whether or not they will be able to afford the increased tuition fees. So I am really happy that the government decided to support the Guild's position and, collaborate further, do more reviews in terms of what exactly the impact of increased tuition fees and the increased tuition fees that the university was proposing, and how it would impact the student population.
Now, Tyler Marie, I'm sure you share their sentiments.
Yeah, the sentiments or the reviews that I've got from my colleagues are very similar. The increase that the university or the campus would have suggested would have been between 25 and 71% across all faculties. And even looking at the lower end of that spectrum, 25% is a big increase. And so I think there is a lot of relief right now in the student population.
So what about the Guild's perspective on the campus cutting operational costs? I know we are going to be talking a bit further in this morning's conversation about what your propositions are, what your suggestions are, but what are your thoughts on that exactly?
Well, as we know, currently most of our nation's citizens are faced with some sort of economic constraints given the economic climate. And so the Guild understands that the campus will have to cut operational costs, but we would just like to note that it is imperative that in cutting those economic costs and restructuring the finances of the campus, that the campus takes into consideration how these changes may affect the student population and their ability to cope in a practical and sustainable way.
I couldn't agree with you more, because one of the things that I believe I saw, if I'm not mistaken, was there was the possible consideration or review of 300 courses being cut, and how that can adversely affect those who may be interested in choosing a particular career. Now, I know the Guild does have a plan, well, a proposed plan in place that they would like to suggest. So would you like to share with us this morning what you would like to suggest, the hybrid learning?
I think definitely one of the good things that would have emerged as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic was definitely our innovation and our ability to adapt to adverse circumstances, one of which would have been the introduction of a hybrid learning system. As many of us are familiar, we would have had to sit in Zoom calls, we would have had to adjust our typical perception of what is normal. And this, to a large extent, would have proven to be beneficial. I mean, you have students who have to commute long distances. This would have alleviated that. There are students who might not be able to afford the commute, who might not be able to, of just be in the financial position to be a regular student. And hybrid learning provides us with a unique opportunity to, walk around these things. And it definitely adds to our modernity in a sense, and that COVID-19 forced us to adapt and to change, and it definitely is a consideration that our campus should consider, especially since it would certainly alleviate some level of operational cost.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. You were going to say something?
Definitely, with the we are the University of the West Indies, so we have a lot of regional students as well. So the hybrid opportunity provide them a way to, I would say, get acclimatized to the university without having to leave their home country and come to Trinidad and Tobago. And it also, in a sense, it was a lot more cost effective, because we were not the only country to be affected by the pandemic. A lot of these other Caribbean islands, who are much more tourism dependent, were severely affected. At least we had a kind of buffer in a sense in terms of we were not as heavily tourism dependent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's so true. And I like the fact, of course, that you've mentioned that in particular, because cost effective, we're looking at operational costs right here in Trinidad and Tobago and what can be done. And, one of the other questions that we definitely are going to need to, of course, focus on, as you mentioned earlier, the longevity, because, of course, of GATE and what may or may not happen. Do you think, I mean, yes, we've done hybrid learning in the pandemic, but do you think this is something that we are going to be able to sustain in the long term for the generations to come?
That is hybrid learning specifically?
Yeah.
I think it is definitely plausible, because, I mean, when we consider modernity, there is no sense that we revert back to this sense of normalcy. In essence, I think we should be pushing to advance ourselves more and to enhance the way in which we do things. I think hybridity provided us with so many benefits that we shouldn't be trying to cut it out. We should try to incorporate that into our model of learning, because it provided so many benefits, it aided so many people, that I think it's too much of an asset to just, revert back to the standard.
I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more, specifically because I look at the work from home that has just taken over the world. We see people coming to stay in Trinidad and Tobago, and they're working I don't know, on the other side of the world, you know what I mean? So it's a great way to also prepare you for the world of work and the way that it's going. But I do have a question. What about the students who may actually need that one-on-one or that physical interaction? Do you think that they're going to be able, or would your proposal be able to include that in some form or fashion so everybody is accommodated?
Of course, absolutely. I think a large part of the Guild and the Guild of Students is our desire to represent the interests of our students. So we are not going to focus on any one particular aspect of student. We want to look at the entire picture. We want to make sure that everyone is being considered, is being heard, and is being treated equitably. And I think that is definitely one of our major considerations.
I think it's fantastic that you all are willing to actually, stand up for the student population. And as you mentioned as well, this is not just for those who are here in Trinidad and Tobago. This is anybody who wants to come to the University of the West Indies. But I do have a question going back to that estimated number, let's say, of the 300 cut. How do you all feel about that when it comes to the possibility of courses being cut? And what do you think about the future of the University of the West Indies and even of the country on a whole with something like that happening?
I mean, it's definitely a difficult situation. I mean, I wish in a perfect world this wouldn't have to happen and the programs wouldn't need to be cut. But given the fact that we're just coming out of a pandemic and the 10% cut in subventions that the university is currently facing, and the fact that tuition is not increasing, I mean, the cost has to be absorbed somewhere. And once the students are not affected, in a sense, so the quality of education that they're being provided with in any aspect is not being diminished, then we understand that this is in the best interest for now, and hopefully this situation does not remain. It's just temporary until things get better and things improve. But again, it's a difficult situation that the university is facing. We don't envy them at all. We just want the students to get the best possible experience.
Yeah, it's a challenging decision that definitely does have to be made.
Yeah.
So Tyler, Marie, Kyle and Ashwarya, one of the things that we spoke about off air very briefly is the fact that, you know, it's estimated roughly 24 countries in the world actually get free tertiary education. I use the term free loosely because, of course, you still have, of course, fees to pay, that sort of thing. So what do you think, or why do you think Trinidad and Tobago deserves to remain this way? Maybe deserves isn't the right word, but you understand where I'm coming from. Why should we continue to have free education? Do you think that we may have gotten to that point in time where we need to access education by any means possible and basically pave our own way?
I think that's a very good question, and I think we have to consider when we consider the longevity of this program, we have to consider the government of Trinidad and Tobago this would have been a great initiative that they would have proposed. But in so doing, I think they unintentionally created essentially a culture of dependency where, you know, we would have come to accept or expect and anticipate that everybody would have the opportunity to access education, which is vital for mobility, vital for people who want to get out of certain situations. But in considering the option for change, we have to consider that culture cannot be changed in a night. And it is imperative that we consider incremental and phased ways to adjust that, but it cannot be something that we make and sign a policy that would drastically affect the lives of thousands of students, of young people, and ultimately shape the rest of their lives.
And I feel like maybe we don't have to say take away the GATE program, but it could be a restructuring of the aftermath, where the students have to go out and work and repay the government in a sense, so that way you're not really creating a cultural dependency, you're just restructuring a bit.
I couldn't agree with you more. Trinidad and Tobago, sadly, we are out of time. Representatives from the Guild of the University of the West Indies, this is our future right here. They have a voice and they're here to stay. Stay tuned. This is the Now Morning Show. We'll be back after this.